A gifted pianist stepped into his dimly lit bar and heard a melody that wasn't his own. It was the bartender, a young woman no one noticed, playing a broken tune on a toy keyboard. In that fleeting moment, everything he thought he knew about his world shifted, and the music they'd create together would rewrite their lives. But what happens when a single note sparks a forbidden connection? Can a song born in shadows survive the spotlight of fame and betrayal? Stay with us to uncover the truth behind their harmony. If this story strikes a chord, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to join us for more tales that linger like a haunting refrain. The bar was heavy with silence, the kind that clung to your skin like damp smoke, swallowing every whisper before it could echo. Lara stood behind the counter, polishing a whiskey glass that cost more than her weekly pay. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her eyes, those deep, weary pools, wandered somewhere far beyond the neon glow of Lagos nightlife. She was only 23, but her gaze carried the weight of dreams deferred, of nights spent chasing a melody she could never quite hold. The bar belonged to Victor Adebayo, a pianist whose fingers could make the world weep. Rich, enigmatic, and colder than the steel of his grand piano, he played for the elite, his music a fleeting gift to a room that barely saw the hands pouring their drinks. Lara wiped the counter, her thoughts drifting to a childhood memory, a battered piano in her father's church, its keys warm under her small fingers. She'd been a girl with dreams then, not this shadow who served and smiled on cue. Madame Kemi, the bar's sharp-tongued manager, stormed in, her heels clicking like a metronome. "Lara!" Her voice sliced through the haze. "You spilled a drink again. Do I pay you to ruin my night?" Lara flinched, muttering an apology, her heart sinking under the familiar sting. Victor swept in moments later, his black coat catching the light as he moved to the piano. He didn't glance at Lara, didn't nod, just sat and played, his notes drowning the room in sorrow. Madame Kemi's scowl softened for him, her voice syrupy. "Maestro, you're early." He gave no reply, his fingers weaving magic while Lara faded into the background, invisible as always. In the quiet of her cramped apartment, Lara sat alone, the city's hum a distant murmur beyond her cracked window. The room was small, its peeling paint and sagging ceiling a far cry from the glittering bar where she poured drinks for strangers. She knelt beside her bed, pulling out a worn book of piano sheet music, its pages yellowed from her father's hands. Each note was a memory of Sunday mornings in his church, his calloused fingers guiding hers across the keys, teaching her to dream through music. Lara was only 23, but those dreams felt like ghosts now, fading in the grind of survival. She clutched the book, her heart heavy with a longing she couldn't name. On the table sat a cheap toy keyboard, its plastic keys chipped from her endless practice. She pressed a note, then another, trying to coax a melody from its tinny sound. The notes stumbled, clumsy and wrong, and she sighed, her shoulders slumping. Her phone buzzed, a message from Temi, her oldest friend, brimming with excitement. "Come to Victor Adebayo's concert tomorrow. It's a chance to see him up close." Lara's fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating. "I'm tired," she typed, the lie easier than admitting she felt unworthy of that world. "Temi pushed." But Lara's smile was thin, her voice barely a whisper. "Not my place." She set the phone down, her eyes drifting to the window where Lagos lights blinked like unreachable stars. She traced a finger along the sheet music, whispering to herself, "One day, I'll play for real." The city didn't answer, but in her chest, a stubborn spark refused to die, glowing faintly in the dark. The concert hall glowed under golden chandeliers, a world of velvet seats and polished smiles that felt like a universe apart from Lara's life. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her navy dress, borrowed from Temi, clinging awkwardly to her frame. Temi had dragged her here, insisting she see Victor Adebayo perform, promising it would spark something in her. Lara's heart raced, not from excitement but from the weight of being out of place among Lagos elite, their laughter sharp as glass. She tugged at her dress, her fingers betraying a tremble. The stage was a sea of light, and when Victor stepped out, the room hushed. His black vest was crisp, his presence like a storm held in check. He sat at the grand piano, and his fingers unleashed a Beethoven sonata, each note slicing through the air, piercing Lara's chest. She stood transfixed, her eyes wide, drinking in the music like a child hearing it for the first time. For a moment, she wasn't the bartender, the invisible girl, just a soul caught in a melody's embrace. Temmie, buzzing with energy, pulled Lara backstage after the performance. "You have to meet him," she said, her voice bright. Lara's stomach twisted, but she followed, her steps hesitant. Backstage, Victor stood among admirers, his face a mask of cool indifference. Temmie pushed forward, introducing Lara with a grin. "This is my friend. She loves your music." Victor's eyes flicked to Lara, sharp and unreadable, then away. "Thank you," he said, his voice flat. Lara's cheeks burned. She turned to leave, but her hand brushed the piano's keys, a soft note ringing out. Victor's head snapped back. "You play?" he asked, his tone curious but edged. Lara froze, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I just love it." He studied her for a moment, then turned away, leaving her words hanging. Temmie nudged her, oblivious, but Lara's heart sank. She stepped back, her fingers lingering on the piano's cool surface, as if it held the dreams she couldn't speak. The crowd's chatter swallowed her, and she felt smaller than ever, a shadow in a world that didn't see her. The bar was cloaked in stillness that night. Its usual din faded to a whisper, the air heavy with the lingering scent of whiskey and wilted roses. Lara moved through the shadows behind the counter, her hands steady as she polished glasses, each swipe a quiet rhythm against the hum of her thoughts. The concert lingered in her mind, Victor's cold glance, the piano's single note under her trembling fingers, a fleeting taste of a dream she'd buried. Madame Kemi had left early, trusting Lara to lock up, a rare pocket of solitude in a place that never slept. The grand piano stood in the corner, its ebony surface catching the dim neon glow, beckoning like a memory she couldn't shake. Lara paused, her cloth hovering, her pulse quickening. She set it down and approached the instrument, her steps soft, as if afraid to disturb its quiet power. Sitting on the bench, her heart thrummed, and her fingers brushed the keys, cool and smooth like river stones. She played a halting melody from her father's old hymns, the notes stumbling but alive, each one a thread to the girl who'd once believed she could sing through sound. A creak shattered the silence. Victor stood in the doorway, his coat slung over one arm, his eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting movement. "What are you doing?" His voice cut sharp, slicing through the quiet. Lara leapt up, her face aflame, words tripping over themselves. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to touch it." Victor stepped closer, his gaze flicking to the piano, then back to her. "Play it again," he said, his tone softer, almost a challenge. Lara's breath hitched. She sat, her hands shaking, and played the hymn again, its notes frail but earnest. Victor watched, his face unreadable, but his silence felt like a weight. Then he slid onto the bench beside her, his presence warm, commanding. "Your fingers are stiff," he murmured, his voice low, like a secret shared in the dark. He reached out, his hands guiding hers, adjusting their curve over the keys. Like this, their fingers brushed, and a spark ran through Lara, her mind flashing to her father's hands, calloused and sure, guiding her as a child. Victor played a chord, its resonance filling the empty bar. "You feel the music," he said, his eyes meeting hers, a faint smile cracking his usual frost. "That's rare." Lara's voice was barely a whisper. "You really think I can?" Victor nodded, his gaze steady. "I see it in you." He stood, leaving her at the piano, the air humming with his words. Lara's fingers lingered on the keys, her chest tight with a hope she hadn't dared feel since her father's hymns faded. A melody stirring in her soul, fragile but unbroken. The late afternoon sun poured through the towering windows of Victor Adebayo's penthouse, casting a golden haze over the room, where a grand piano stood like a sacred altar. Lara hovered in the doorway, clutching her father's worn sheet music, its pages soft and creased from years of hope. Her faded sweater and scuffed sneakers felt like a betrayal in this pristine space, her heart a wild drumbeat of doubt and wonder. Victor had invited her here, not as the bartender who faded into the bar's shadows, but as someone he saw, someone who could play. He stood by the piano, his linen shirt loose, sleeves rolled, his presence both commanding and calm. "Start with scales," he said, his voice steady, like a conductor setting the tempo. Lara nodded, her fingers trembling as she sat, the keys cool beneath her touch. She played a C major scale, halting, unsure, but Victor's gaze held her, unwavering. "Good," he said, leaning in to adjust her posture, his hand brushing her shoulder, sending a quiet jolt through her. "Relax your wrists. Let the music breathe." They moved to chords, Victor's patience a surprise against his usual frost. Lara fumbled, but he didn't chide, only guided, his fingers occasionally grazing hers, each touch a spark. "Why me?" she blurted, her voice small. "Bro, I'm nobody, just the bartender." Victor paused, his eyes softening, a crack in his guarded armor. "You're not nobody. I saw it last night. Your hands belong to this." Lara's throat tightened, her mind drifting to her father, his rough hands guiding hers over a church piano, humming hymns under a cracked ceiling. "My father played in our church," she whispered. "I wanted to be like him, but he's gone." Victor listened, then spoke, his voice low, weighted. "I lost my sister. This piano kept me alive when I wanted to stop breathing." Their eyes locked, a shared wound weaving them closer. He played a hymn, one her father loved, its notes pulling tears she hadn't shed in years. Lara's fingers followed, steadier now, playing a melody that felt like her father's voice calling her back. Victor nodded, a rare warmth in his smile. "You're faster than I was." The room pulsed with their music, a fragile bond taking root. As the sun sank, Lara felt a door creak open in her soul, not just to a dream, but to a place where she was seen, where her music mattered. The bar thrummed with its evening pulse, glasses clinking under neon lights, but a new tension coiled in Lara's chest. She poured drinks behind the counter, her hands steady, but her heart still vibrated from Victor's lessons, his touch on her fingers lingering like a soft note. The crowd parted as Tara, Victor's ex-girlfriend, swept in, her opera star aura dominating the room. Her silk dress gleamed, and her eyes, sharp as shards, fixed on Lara. "So, the bartender fancies herself a pianist," Tara sneered, her voice cutting through the chatter. Lara's cheeks flushed, but she kept wiping the counter, her jaw tight. Tara leaned in, her perfume suffocating. "Victor's just playing charity, dear. You're out of your league." Before Lara could reply, Tara tipped a glass of red wine, the liquid splashing across Lara's apron, soaking through to her skin. The crowd's laughter pierced, sharper than the stain. "My mistake," Tara said, her smirk venomous. Lara's hands shook as she grabbed a rag, her throat closing with humiliation. She fled to the bathroom, the door slamming behind her. Her reflection stared back, stained, small, a girl who didn't belong. Tears welled, but she whispered, "You're more." A knock jolted her. Victor's voice came, urgent, low. "Lara, let me in." She opened the door and he stepped inside, his handkerchief already out, wiping the wine from her apron. His eyes held hers, fierce but gentle. "She's wrong," he said. "You're not her shadow." Lara's voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like I am?" Victor's hand rested on hers, steadying her. "Because you haven't heard your own music yet." He drove her home, the city lights streaking past in silence. Lara gripped his handkerchief, her heart caught between shame and a spark of defiance. As if his words had struck a chord she could still play. The bar shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, transformed into a stage for Tara's extravagant gala. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and ambition. Lagos elites swirling through the room, their laughter sharp and polished like the glasses they held. Lara navigated the crowd, her tray of cocktails trembling in her grip, her black apron a stark reminder of her place among the glittering gowns and tailored suits. The sting of Tara's earlier humiliation. Wine splashed across her apron, laughter ringing in her ears, still clung to her, but Victor's fleeting glances from the grand piano anchored her. His fingers wove a melody that hushed the room, each note a thread of magic, though his eyes sought hers, a silent promise in the chaos. Tara, radiant in emerald silk, held court near the stage, her smile sharp as a shard of glass. "Oh, look, it's Victor's little pet," she called, her voice slicing through the music like a blade through silk. "Why don't you play for us, bartender? Show us what your lessons with the maestro have taught you." The crowd turned, their eyes pinning Lara like a spotlight on a stage she never chose. Her heart thundered, the tray nearly slipping from her hands. "I'm not ready," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the room's hum. Tara's laugh was venomous, cutting deeper than the stairs. "Then why waste his time? Go on, entertain us." The murmurs grew, a wave of judgment crashing over her. Lara set the tray down, her legs leaden, and approached the piano, its keys gleaming like a challenge. She sat, her fingers trembling, and pressed a note. Jarring. Wrong. The crowd snickered, their amusement a knife in her chest. Her vision blurred, shame threatening to drown her. Then Victor was there, sliding onto the bench beside her, his presence a quiet fortress. "Follow me," he murmured, his voice steady. His hands joined hers, guiding them into a duet, hesitant at first, then rising, her clumsy notes blending into his, crafting something raw, then radiant. The room fell silent, captivated, then erupted in applause. Tara's face twisted, her eyes burning with defeat as she stormed out, her heels clicking like a fading metronome. Victor leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You were more than enough." Lara's heart soared, the piano's echo carrying her past the crowd's judgment, into a melody that felt like hers, like home. The penthouse was a world of its own, bathed in the warm flicker of candles that cast golden shadows across the grand piano, its ebony surface gleaming like a still lake under moonlight. Lara stood in the center, her borrowed navy dress catching the soft glow, her heart a drumbeat of wonder and fear. Victor had invited her here, not as the bartender who poured his drinks, but as someone who shared his music, his soul. She clutched her father's old sheet music, its edges frayed, a relic of dreams she'd thought buried. Victor sat at the piano, his linen shirt rolled at the sleeves, his fingers poised. "This is for you," he said, his voice low, carrying a weight that made her breath catch. He began to play, a composition of his own, a melody that wove threads of grief and hope, each note a brushstroke painting memories of her father's church, of hymns that once lifted her heart. Lara stood transfixed, her eyes glistening, as if the music had reached inside her, unlocking a door she'd sealed shut long ago. When the final chord faded, the room held its breath. Victor looked at her, his usual guarded gaze softened, almost vulnerable. "What do you feel?" he asked. Lara's voice trembled. "It's like, you saw my heart." They sank onto the plush rug, the city's skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lara spoke of her father, his hands guiding hers over church keys, his death stealing her dreams. Victor listened, then shared his own scar. "My sister loved this piano. When she died, I played to keep her alive." Their eyes met, a silent bridge spanning their losses. Lara's fear spilled out. "I don't belong here, Victor. I'm just a bartender, not your world." He took her hand, his touch warm, steady. "Your world is where your music lives, and it lives here." His words sank deep, stirring a hope she hadn't dared feel. Victor stood, offering his hand. "Dance with me." Lara hesitated, then let him pull her close. They swayed to an unspoken waltz, the candlelight weaving their shadows into one. Her head rested against his chest, his heartbeat a rhythm she could follow, steady, real. The city's hum faded, leaving only their breath, their steps, the quiet music of their nearness. Victor's voice was a whisper, raw. "You make me feel alive again, Lara." Her heart raced, the room humming with a melody only they could hear, a fragile promise blooming in the stillness, brighter than the stars outside. The city's lights blurred outside Lara's tiny apartment, their glow mocking the dim bulb flickering above her kitchen table. She sat hunched over her toy keyboard, its chipped keys silent, her hands trembling as she stared at the crumpled newspaper on the counter. The headline screamed, "Bartender's bold play for pianist Victor Adebayo's heart." The words twisted like a knife, accusing her of chasing fame, of seducing Victor for his spotlight. Lara's breath hitched, her eyes stinging with betrayal. Temmie, her best friend, had leaked the story, spilling her dreams to the press out of jealousy, out of a bitterness Lara hadn't seen coming. The article painted her as a schemer, a nobody clawing at a world she didn't belong to. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "How could you, Temmie?" The phone buzzed, Temmie's name flashing. But Lara let it ring, her heart too raw to answer. She'd trusted Temmie, shared her fears, her fragile hope of playing piano, only to be sold out for a headline. A knock at the door startled her. Victor stood there, his coat dusted with evening mist, his face tight with concern. "I saw the paper," he said, stepping inside. Lara turned away, her voice breaking. "They think I'm using you. Maybe they're right. I don't belong in your world." Victor's hand found her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You belong where you make music. That's all that matters." She shook her head, tears falling. "Temmie was my friend. She did this." Victor knelt beside her, his eyes steady. "Then she doesn't know you, but I do." He pulled her to the rickety table, pointing to her sheet music. "Play for me, right now." Lara's fingers hesitated, then pressed the keys, a halting melody rising, raw and real. Victor nodded, his voice low. "That's you, not their lies." He told her about his next concert, a grand event, and asked her to play a duet with him. "The world needs to hear you," he said. Lara's heart wavered, fear battling hope. She confronted Temmie later, her voice steady despite the hurt. "Why?" Temmie's eyes were cold. "You were leaving me behind for him." Lara walked away, her spine straighter, her resolve hardening. Victor's faith in her was a lifeline, pulling her toward a stage she'd never dared imagine. The apartment felt less small as she sat back at the keyboard, her fingers finding the notes with new strength, each one a step toward a future she'd claim, no matter who tried to silence her. The concert hall shimmered like a cathedral carved from light, its towering ceiling arching over velvet seats packed with Lagos elite, their whispers a soft hum beneath the chandelier's golden glow. Lara stood backstage, her white gown flowing like a moonlit river, a far cry from the stained apron that once defined her. Her hands trembled, clutching her father's frayed sheet music, its pages a tether to the girl who dreamed beside him in a small church, humming hymns under a sagging roof. Tonight, she wasn't the bartender fading into shadows. She was here to play, to share the stage with Victor Adebayo, whose music had stirred her soul awake. Her pulse raced, the weight of the moment pressing like a hand on her chest. Temmie's betrayal, the newspaper's cruel lies, Tara's venom, all echoed faintly, but Victor's voice cut through, steady as a beacon. "You're ready?" he'd said, his fingers grazing hers before they stepped into the spotlight. The crowd fell silent as they sat at twin pianos, their keys gleaming like promises forged in starlight. Lara's breath hitched, her fingers poised, but Victor's quiet nod anchored her. Their duet began, his bold, soaring notes intertwining with her tentative, heartfelt ones. The melody swelled, Lara's hands gaining strength, each chord a rebellion against the doubts that had chained her. The hall held its breath, their music weaving a tale of loss, of dreams reclaimed, of two hearts finding each other in sound. Her fingers danced, no longer faltering, and when the final note rang out, the crowd surged to their feet, applause crashing like a tidal wave. Lara's smile broke free, wide and radiant, her eyes shimmering with joy. Victor rose, taking her hand, lifting it high, his gaze burning with pride. "You were everything," he whispered, his voice a soft vow meant only for her. Tara lingered in the crowd's shadows, her emerald dress a dim echo of her faded reign. She'd come to reclaim Victor, to prove Lara's rise was a fluke, but the music had silenced her pride. She slipped away, her heels a faint tap lost in the roar. Backstage, Victor drew Lara into a quiet corner, away from the camera's flash. He pulled a necklace from his pocket, its silver note pendant catching the dim light. "This is us," he said, clasping it around her neck, his touch lingering warm. "You're not a moment, Lara. You're my melody." Her throat tightened, tears brimming as she traced the pendant, feeling her father's hymns, her own dreams, alive in its weight. "I never believed I'd belong here," she murmured. Victor's smile was tender, unguarded. "You always did." They returned for an encore, the crowd's cheers a living pulse. Lara sat alone at the piano, her fingers finding a hymn her father taught her, its notes clear, steady, a love letter to the girl she'd been. Victor watched, his eyes fixed on her, as if she were the only light in the room. The music carried them beyond the stage, beyond the city, into a world they'd carved together. Lara faced the sea of faces, no longer invisible, her heart full, her melody soaring, a testament to a dream that refused to break.